Together, let's briefly consider evidence. And I think the key takeaway here is that evidence should be objective, not subjective. It should be public, not private. Now, in general, evidence is something which provides a sign or proof that something is true. It allows us to plainly, clearly see something as true. In this sense, evidence allows us to merge our mental state with what's objectively the case. So on the one hand, we have the subjective. We have the subjective mental state. On the other hand, we have the objective reality as it is independent from our own thinking or feelings. The subjective is private. The objective is public, we might say. So my own mental state and your own mental state is private. For example, if you tell me the Pythagorean theorem is true, that doesn't show me it is true. I cannot access your own thoughts or feelings. Those are private, and therefore it's impossible for me to do so. So for you to show me evidence that the Pythagorean theorem is true, you have to give me evidence that is publicly accessible. It has to be objective. And that, in fact, is what a mathematical proof does, because it's something that all of us, at least in principle, can work through. And this eventually can allow us to see that the given theorem is true. Now, this is not just a matter of giving evidence to another person, however. When you or I think some proposition is true, we should try to have some objective evidence, because our feelings and biases can mislead us. Now, good evidence merges the subjective with the objective. So good evidence merges the subjective and the objective. A good first question is, what is good evidence? It should be objective. It should be grounded in the nature of things. Now, to be sure, if the question is, how do I feel? What's the evidence? Well, you can only appeal to your own subjective mental state. So if I feel happy or depressed, it's just what I feel. That's the evidence. But if we're talking about a truth of mathematics, or if we're talking about the truth or falsity of an economic theory, we have to appeal to objective evidence, not just how we feel about these things. Next, we can ask, what are good sources for evidence? So that would include, for example, our senses. Now, sometimes our senses mislead us, but as a rule, they're trustworthy. If I see my best friend across the street, that's evidence that he is there. And of course, I can verify this by approaching him and talking with him and so forth. We have testimony or authority. Most of our knowledge comes from testimony or authority. If we reject all testimony, then we will end up at radical skepticism. We pretty much could know nothing. Nonetheless, if we're going to trust in someone, we better think that person is honest, at least over the given topic matter, that they have a good memory, that they're alert, that they're disinterested, and so on and so forth. Moreover, we can distinguish between natural faith and supernatural faith. We really can't get away from faith because a trust in testimony is an act of faith. It's a natural faith. But there's also something called supernatural faith if you have faith in a sacred text. There's also reasoning. So the proof that the Pythagorean theorem is true is a good source of evidence. But most of what we know comes in degrees, not absolutes. Most of our reasoning is inductive in nature, not deductive. It's not axiomatic. Most of the things we reason about are about contingent realities. And that's why we have to use inductive reasoning. And because we're dealing with contingent realities, our reasonings are more often than not probable, not absolute. So in this sense, we can make a distinction between a priori evidence and a posteriori. A priori evidence doesn't require empirical testing. I don't need to go out into the world to test the quadratic formula. I can just reason about it in an armchair way. But knowing how many natural satellites orbit the Earth or orbit Jupiter is not something we can do in an a priori way. In any case, it's a posteriori. And finally, how can we test evidence? Well, once again, we should think about the question, is it objective in the first place? Is it grounded in the nature of things? Does it correspond to the nature of things? So that is what good evidence is, so that's how we should test the evidence, right? But also we have to consider relevancy. Are the premises relevant to the conclusion? Is the evidence relevant to the given proposition? We should think about sufficiency. Is the evidence sufficient to warrant our belief in the given proposition or theorem? Or do we need more? Is it just compelling in general? Is the truth of the evidence obvious? Or is it probable? Those are the things we need to ask. But in any case, when we're thinking about evidence, we should always appeal to objective reality. The objective must ground the subjective. What we think should be grounded in what in fact is. We should try to align ourselves to what is true. Good philosophy is an openness and embrace of reality. It's not about embracing our own ideologies, but it's about opening yourself up to what experience tells you, to what reality tells you, to what the evidence tells you.